Let's think for a moment about the word glass. What's the first thing that comes to your mind? Probably an everyday item, a window pane, a drinking glass, or even worse, a cheap, mass-produced, plastic-looking piece of jewelry from a corner store. It's a material that seems to have no real value, something we throw away if it breaks, and something we consider the poor, looked down upon relative of gemstones. If someone at an antique market tells you, "Oh, that's just glass," you probably lose interest right away and move on to the next table searching for real treasures. But what if I told you that with this knee-jerk reaction, you're making the biggest mistake of your life? What if it turned out that behind the most exciting, mysterious, and often the most expensive pieces of jewelry history, it wasn't nature, but human cleverness and the genius of glass art that stood? That for centuries, glass wasn't a poor man's compromise, but a conscious, incredibly expensive choice made by kings and queens. Let's step together into a world where queens and other noble ladies proudly wore glass at court balls, and where the brilliant optical illusions involved so many hours of work that the price of the finished jewelry rivaled the value of a small diamond set. This is the Antique Jewellery Aficionados, and today we're completely rewriting everything you thought you knew about jewelry and glass. To understand this amazing cultural journey, we need to travel back in time, long before the Georgian era, all the way to 15th century Venice, to the mysterious island of Murano. Imagine a time when making glass wasn't factory work, but a top-secret state secret. But why all the fuss? The reason is no less important than that they created a material that the elite of the time literally treated as a gemstone, just like sapphires and rubies. When a master named Angelo Barovier invented cristallo around 1450, the world was amazed. Before that, all glass was cloudy, greenish or greyish, full of bubbles. But cristallo was like the clearest spring water, perfectly colourless, transparent, ice-cold and pure. It didn't contain lead, like today's crystals. It was made with sodium manganese, and nobles bought it not because it was cheap, but because it represented the absolute peak of technological advancement at the time. During the Renaissance, the Venetian Republic kept its recipe a secret and used it for the windows of famous buildings like the Milan Cathedral. At the same time, Murano also saw the birth of chalcedonio, a marbled glass made with an incredibly complex chemical process that mimicked jasper and agate, and aventurine, into which microscopic copper crystals were floated, making the glass sparkle with gold at the slightest light. These glass beads and pendants were more expensive in the market than most real gemstones. People loved them because they saw in them the almost alchemical knowledge required to create them. As the centuries passed, Czech and German workshops took over in the 17th century. They experimented with a completely different, harder glass, called potash glass. This material was so dense that it could not only be moulded, but also worked on grinding wheels, just like rock crystal. And then, in the 1670s in England, a gentleman named George Ravenscroft came along and changed everything. He introduced lead oxide into the glass mixture. The heavy, clear lead crystal was born. This material had such amazing light refraction and dispersion that when candlelight hit it, it produced a rainbow sparkle that most natural gemstones simply couldn't compete with. This technological explosion set the stage for the era that antique jewelry lovers admire most today, the Georgian paste cult. We need to pause here and clear up the most important question that every new collector wonders about. Why wasn't this considered a fake? Why did the rich people of that time proudly wear these pieces? To understand this, we need to forget about today's sparkling diamonds. In the 18th century, diamond cutting was still very new. Most stones were left in their natural, rough crystal shape. Their flat sides were dull, and because of the simple tools used back then, diamonds often looked greyish, dull, and lifeless in daylight. But glass was easy to shape. The material didn't decide the design, the designer's cleverness did. A jeweler could dream up a grand, flowing floral or ribbon-like shape, and the glass could be cut and polished to exactly the right size and form. This gave them a freedom to create that wasn't possible with hard gemstones. Also, paste stones were made by the same skilled jewelers, using the same careful, weeks-long hand-cutting methods and set in the same real precious metals, usually silver or gold, as diamonds. The value of the jewelry wasn't decided by what was dug out of the ground, but by how many hours of work the greatest artists of the time put into hand-cutting the stone and carving the setting. At that time, glass jewelry wasn't a sign of being poor, but of luxury and style. But behind the rise of glass and premium rhinestones in the 18th century, there were not only aesthetic reasons, but also very serious practical and safety concerns. This era gave birth to the institution of so-called travel jewelry, which fundamentally changed the social perception of quality gemstone imitations. Imagine the logistics of the time. Members of the high nobility regularly travelled between their city residences and their country castles. Journeys on post roads and bumpy paths lasted for days, and the lonely deserted stretches between post stations posed a constant armed risk from notorious highwaymen. Since family jewellery sets represented the entire wealth of a dynasty, the nobles chose a very logical risk management tactic. They commissioned the most renowned court jewellers to create exact replicas of their priceless diamond, emerald, and ruby jewellery. These were made from hand-faceted, high-lit crystal or antique paste. When the family set off on a journey, the real gemstones were kept strictly locked away, and these premium copies were worn for the duration of the trip. If the carriage was attacked, the loss of the pieces handed over to the robbers did not mean financial ruin. This practice eventually developed to the point where the lines between real and imitation became completely blurred, and paste became a fashion in its own right. King Louis XV of France, for example, was so enchanted by the sparkle of leaded glass in candlelight that he officially appointed his court jeweller, Georges Frédéric Strass, as the king's royal jeweller in 1734. At the balls of the Versailles court, high-ranking ladies wore the latest paste creations not out of necessity, but proudly and openly. Not because they lacked money for diamonds, but because in the candle-lit ballrooms of the time, these high lead stones sparkled much more vividly and spectacularly than the real gemstones of the era, which were still in their infancy with duller cuts. If you pick up an antique piece of jewellery today, knowing the different types of glass will be your most important guide for figuring out what it is. And here, we need to make a very clear and important professional detour. Paste and regular jewellery glass are not the same material, and you should never use their names interchangeably. Paste is a heavy lead silicate with a very high lead content, made specifically to look like diamonds and other gemstones. This raw material was never poured into molds. Instead, the blocks were cut by hand, one by one, using the same diamond cutting wheels as real gemstones. That's why their edges are perfectly sharp and straight. On the other hand, later jewellery glasses have their own unique look. They don't try to look like something else. They became valuable because of their own special shine. Most of the time, they were shaped by pouring or pressing them into molds, so their facet edges will always look a little rounded under a magnifying glass. Among Georgian and Regency-era paste stones, also known as strass, the most exciting and sought-after type for collectors is definitely the black dot paste. This technique took advantage of a special feature of diamond cutting from that time. Back then, the bottom-most flat part of a diamond, called the culet, was very large and open. Since these stones were set in closed-back settings, when you looked at them from the top, this open culet looked like a dark black dot in the middle of the stone. To make the trick perfect, the artisans would put a tiny dot of thick black glue on the bottom of the closed silver or gold setting. When the hand-cut lead glass stone was pressed onto this base, the flat tip of the stone fit perfectly into the black substance. From above, this created the perfect illusion that you were looking into the deep inside of a real, antique-cut diamond. When checking these kinds of jewels, the condition of the metal on the closed back and the intactness of the inner silver foiling are the most important things. Complete, untouched Georgian jewellery sets, called parures, are now considered true museum rarities. But let's move forward in time and look at other amazing types of glass you might find. From the mid-18th century to the mid-19th century, one of the most exciting and mysterious materials in antique jewellery was Vauxhall glass. This technology started at the Vauxhall Glassworks factory in London. The special items made there were sold in the famous Vauxhall Pleasure Gardens nearby. Imagine the time. London's fancy people would go there to walk, eat, dance and flirt. Earrings, necklaces, hairpins and brooches bought in the park were some of the earliest and fanciest souvenirs. Vauxhall jewellery was made from a deep red, emerald green, sea blue, purple or even jet black glass paste. This paste was shaped into very delicate forms like butterflies, snowflakes, flowers or crosses. The trick was on the back of the stone. The polished glass pieces had a shiny, silvery, mirrored foil layer on their back. When light hit the dark glass from the front, this mirrored foil gave the jewellery a dramatic, almost mesmerising, metallic, shimmering depth. Even though Vauxhall glass has its roots deep in the 18th century Georgian era, many pieces that collectors think are Georgian are actually early Victorian because people loved this material for decades. Since Vauxhall jewellery was very fragile, undamaged original pieces are now very rare museum items in the antique market. In the late 18th and early 19th centuries, a completely different kind of material became popular. Opaline glass, which was simply called opal paste by jewellers back then. This is a milky, semi-clear glass that got its special, misty texture during the cooling process because different metal oxides separated. It was almost always cut into a cabochon shape, which means a smooth, domed surface. The trick here was to place a pinkish metal foil under the stone in a closed setting. This way, when light hit the glass, it would show soft blue and delicate pink tones at the same time. Even though this glass hardly looked like real precious opal, ladies of the time loved it because it fit perfectly with daytime fashion. It looked especially elegant and striking when this milky bluish-pink opaline glass was combined with white antique rhinestones. But around the turn of the 20th century, the world of jewellery took a dramatic and beautiful turn that finally brought glass out of the shadow of gemstones. Art Nouveau was born, and it defiantly turned away from the cold, geometric sparkle of diamonds. The artists of this era felt that pure luxury had killed the true soul of jewellery, so they turned to the soft, organic forms of nature, to mystical vines, flowers, and insects. And in this revolution, glass not only found its place, but became the main star, thanks to the genius of a man whose name today means glass alchemy. That man was René Lalique. Lalique and his contemporaries broke all previous rules. They no longer wanted to pretend glass was a diamond or a ruby. For them, glass was a fluid, pliable, mystical, sculptural material that could express far more emotion than a rigid gemstone. Here, for example, is this amazing masterpiece, the famous parrot necklace. Here, the master shaped colourless opalescent glass by pressing it into steel moulds, creating finely crafted opposing small birds that hung down like icicles. When you turn this piece towards the light, the moulded glass, thanks to the interplay of surface polishing and matting, lets the rays pass through as if it were carved from real rock crystal or mystical frozen ice. But Lalique didn't stop there. He also perfected another amazing technique called paste of glass, or pâte de verre. The essence of this is that fine glass powder was mixed with various metal oxides for stunning colors, then pressed cold into a unique mold and slowly fused in a kiln. This is how the wonderful anemone brooch, for example, was created. This process gave the petals a silky matte, waxy, slightly translucent, sculptural texture that faithfully reproduced the fragile softness of nature. But Lalique carried out his boldest and most astonishing revolution on the fingers, in the world of rings. Imagine the era when rings were all the same, a gold band with a claw setting and a gemstone on top. Lalique kicked down the door on this tradition too. He took a single massive clear block of glass and fashioned an entire ring from the glass itself. There was no metal band, no traditional setting. The entire piece of jewellery, the ring body and the ornament on it, was a single continuous glass creation. Let's look at these regal deep blue, emerald green, or even ice-cold colourless pieces. After the glass was cast into a mould, Lalique brought them to life with a brilliant interplay of surfaces. The outer flat or convex edges of the rings were polished to a mirror shine, while the delicate patterns on them, mythological faces, birds, or tiny tendrils, were completely matted by acid etching or sandblasting. This contrast, the alternation of silky foggy and brilliantly clear glass surfaces, gave the jewellery such a hypnotic inner light, as if the rings themselves were alive. These massive glass rings were true luxury items of Art Nouveau, incredibly fragile, yet monumental. This is when satin glass also became widespread. This high-quality material was subjected to a fine acid bath after grinding, which microscopically etched its surface. The result was a silky, matte finish that felt soft to the touch and visually evoked the pearlescent glow of misty mornings or the inner radiance of mystical moonstones. When ladies wore these jewels, society didn't ask how much the stone cost, but silently admired the incredible artistic vision and craftsmanship that could transform simple sand and metals into such museum-worthy masterpieces. And finally, we come to the material that is still collectors' favourite, dragon's breath glass. This type of check glass, with metal inclusions, had its golden age at the very beginning of the 20th century, during the transition period between Art Nouveau and Art Deco. It was originally developed to be an affordable replacement for the very expensive, rare Mexican fire opals. The technology is based on a deep ruby red or peachy pink glass mass, into which molten metals, most often copper, were mixed while still in a liquid glowing state. When the glass was polished into a smooth, domed cabochon shape, the internal metal inclusions created an amazing optical play. As the stone moves, vivid electric blue and purple flashes burst forth from the depths of the red, as if a dragon were breathing fire inside the stone. Because the play of colour comes from the internal metal particles themselves, original antique pieces never have foil or paint on the back. In the antique market, dragon's breath glass is almost always identified with the classic red base colour, but the genius of Czech glassmakers didn't stop there. As they experimented with glass bases, they created some extremely limited, now very expensive, collectible colour variations. There was also a green base version with blue flashes, and even an amber base with pale purple internal fire. These non-red pieces are among the rarest experimental masterpieces of Czech glassmaking, and if someone stumbles upon an antique brooch or ring with a blue base flaming green, they possess a true collector's treasure. If you find an unknown glass jewel, always start by looking at how it catches the light. See how it acts in the light, then turn it over and check its back and its setting. Is the back closed? Is there foil? And if so, what condition is it in? For paste pieces, a closed silver back and a possible black dot at the bottom of the stone are key signs for identification. Also, look at the cut. Sharp edges on faceted shapes show it was made by hand, while rounded edges mean it was molded. Remember, Glass scratches easily, so real antique pieces usually have small signs of wear on their surface. This is one of the best ways to tell if something is truly old. Old glass jewellery isn't a compromise, and it's not the poor cousin of gemstones. It's its own category in the history of technology and culture, backed by centuries of artistic new ideas and the highest level of human handiwork. Next time you're walking through an antique market and you see a dark red stone with blue flames suddenly flashing from its depths, don't just walk by. Stop, pick it up, and think of the Czech glassmaker who, over 100 years ago, mixed copper into the glowing glass to create something that would last through time. Here on this channel, we learn to see true value. Join us next time.